Today's PerfBytes episode is brought to you by our exclusive sponsor, Flood.io. Whether you need to load test a single URL, simulate realistic user scenarios with JMeter, or execute extremely large concurrency and volumes with Gatling, Flood.io provides a simple and affordable platform for everyone. For more information, visit their website at flood.io.
It's time for PerfBytes.
What the is PerfBytes? The fourth square meal of the day. Don't bogart the PerfBytes. Fuck waffles. Add nutritional value to your brain. PerfBytes.
Whatever.
Hey! Welcome back, PerfByters. Once again, we are taking a few of your precious minutes in your life to share all that we can about the practices of performance testing and engineering and other generally nonsensical things. Once again, your demonstratively jocose hosts, Mark Tomlinson, that's me, and James Pulley. James, how are you?
Fine.
That's fine. Fine as in granulated particles, or fine as in a general well-being?
Fine.
Oh, that's just fine. That sounds good. Actually, I know for a fact, James, when we came up with today's topic of bad performance testing, that's the music you hear in the background right now is Donna Summer singing about, well, I think it was Bad Girls, which is very different than performance testing, but still, I wanted to get some disco on. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think bad tests.
Bad tests.
Yeah.
Bad talking about your bad test. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think
Exactly.
that's good. Shout out to our co-hosts who can't join us tonight. Well, of course, Howard. I kind of miss Howard from so many years ago. And so he's always welcome to come back. But Eric Pregler, who's in New York City right now, hobnobbing around and working for the week. That's very nice. And Brian Wilson, who says he's giving his daughter a bath. So there are some things that are more important.
From a priorities perspective, Brian, I think you're choosing properly.
Yeah. It would be weird if I said, hey, I would also like to give your daughter a bath. This is just that doesn't sound right when I say it that way.
That does not work.
No.
Yeah.
And I don't think I think I should probably hold back from actually saying that.
Yeah.
As usual, James, right off the top of every show, we tend to have some announcements. And
Yes.
this particular episode, we have a very exciting announcement, which is a shout out to Andy Grabner and
Gabriela Salamanca.
yes, who are engaged. Woohoo!
Woo!
Congratulations
To
Andy and Gabby.
You two kids, you.
Oh, you crazy kids getting married and all that. Yeah, exactly. Congratulations, Andy. And of course, a couple of shout outs. As we mentioned, Eric is working on bringing back the Performance Engineering Cafe and interview show. So that's going to be coming. You can send us an email at cafe@perfbytes.com if you want to get in touch with Eric. And Brian Wilson, who's we're just getting things set up and started to launch sometime this year, the ask@perfbytes.com show, a whole show which is just about Q&A. I know I have a bunch from my old inbox, and there's some people that still have questions. And you can send us an email at ask@perfbytes.com. And that'll actually end up in the queue with Brian, and he will research and get you answers to all of those things, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, if he doesn't know the answer, he's going to go find someone who knows the answer and get an exciting conversation from them with your answer.
Or some contradiction. He might find two people with two different answers.
Ooh, that could be interesting.
Because there's a lot of opinion in our world. And of course, we want to give a shout out to all of the upcoming conferences where now that there's more of us involved, you can come check out and hang out with the PerfBytes folks, James, Eric, Brian, and myself.
Mark, we've got Cast August 16th to the 19th in Nashville.
In Nashville? Nash Vegas. Eric will be there for sure. I don't know that I'm going to make it. In August. August is kind of a downtime for me. I actually have something else going on that weekend. STPCon, as usual, is in Virginia. As usual, in the fall. This is September 25th to 29th. We'll be down in Virginia, just outside of D.C., in one of the hotels near the airport. Test Bash Germany is coming in October. That's in Munich. The first time we do a Test Bash in Munich, that's with Test Pappy and Vera and Mikkel and these guys that are... Christine, I think Christine Corbis is doing that. So it's pretty cool.
So Philadelphia, a lot of stuff coming in the fall.
Yeah. So we are actually community sponsors of DevOps Days Philadelphia in October. So Andy Grabner is actually going to be there, I think. So maybe Gabby will come. You come hang out at my house. It'll be fine. But you can check out more at DevOpsDays.org, and along with another podcast, Arrested DevOps. Get it? Play on word. Arrested DevOps.
Yeah.
Arrested DevOps is also a community sponsor. So give them a visit.
Is Larry David on that podcast?
I think it would be funny if he were. The other one coming up, of course, Test Bash in November then is here in Philly the 9th and 10th. The same week as CMG, Computer Measurement Group Impact, is in November. I think that's in New Orleans. So there may be some folks that, go to New Orleans, then come to Philly. It's all good fun. Eric mentioned that he's going to be at Let's Test in South Africa. That'll be end of November, 26th, 28th. I guess that's right. Thanksgiving time. That'd be kind of cool. James, you're still stating that you can be hired for the price of 2 Starbucks beverages starting in October. What does that mean?
Yes. So there's the big tease. How do you hire Mark or me, or in this case, just me, for the price of 2 Starbucks beverages?
What's the most expensive Starbucks beverage?
Well, it's about $5. Yeah. So you're looking at $10 a month. How do you hire James for $10 a month?
$10 a month.
So stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
There's some interesting things coming there.
Yeah, that'll be very good. And just backing up in the calendar a little bit to August 26th, that's a Saturday. We are going to be in at the Origins, the founding, the what do you call that? The foundry where we forged PerfBytes.
It's Eden.
It's the Eden generation. Yes, it's the new size is very small at IHOP in Beaverton, Oregon on Saturday, August 26th. We are going to throw a PerfBytes barbecue, and more details to come on that. But John Washon, our good friend who works out there, has said yes, absolutely. Let's make it happen. So more details to come here probably in July as things get going, and then life will be good. That'll be swell. James,
Mark,
got anything else off the top of your head?
I'm going to be in Shell Lake, Wisconsin in mid-August.
Driving up there.
Not for the Jazz Festival.
No.
But, big family reunion.
But if you're driving from Charlotte up to there, then there's people on the way. You could stop in Ohio.
Absolutely. I'm planning on stopping in Ohio and the Chicagoland area. I've got to stop in Green Bay.
Yep.
For a customer.
Yep.
And then over to Shell Lake, and who knows, on my round trip, I might hit Minneapolis.
Hey, there you go. That'd be cool. I also a meetup. If you hit meetup, I'm hooked up with a bunch of the Ministry of Testing meetups. There's a couple other Perf meetups, the DevOps meetups. DevOps Philly is here. They have a meetup. So if you haven't been up on meetup, go look me up, or maybe I don't know if James you're on there. But you can see what other meetups will be at. We have a bunch of ones. I have a bunch of social ones happening around Philly, around the area. So if you're in the Philly area this summer, we'll be doing lots of different social meetups. Come and have some barbecue and a brew because we like home brew. We like our craft breweries here around the Philadelphia area. That's about it. James, are you ready to talk about bad performance testing?
Yes.
Bad. Let's get bad.
So this is not like San Francisco bad, where there's a collar involved and a paddle.
You need a safe word.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not that type of bad.
Bad in terms of the opposite of almost everything we've ever talked about on this show.
Yeah.
I mean, we complain. We talk about failings and things, and with obviously in the news of the damned, we talk about things that people don't pay attention to and stuff. We haven't done a whole episode just focusing on like the characteristics of a bad performance test.
And just as kind of background, Mark and I have gone into probably hundreds of different customers over the years, and there are patterns that we just look for. There are things that jump out as, our questions that we ask, and that's really where these come from. We want to get a quick understanding of how bad, not Michael Jackson bad, but just how bad things are going, so we can kind of, put you back on track type of thing.
Well, Michael Jackson bad, that would also be a song we could do. I'm bad, you know it. But usually when somebody who's really good at performance testing comes in and they see that you're bad, they're the ones that know that you're bad. You don't know that you're bad.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I organize things. James gives some great ideas here, but I organized them into sort of the basic characteristics of a bad performance test. And then we'll look at intermediate foul play, and we'll look at advanced incompetency. So James, kick us off in the basics of like what would make a bad performance test.
So let's start with the scientific method. So the scientific method says we have a couple of characteristics that we have associated with the test. One, a test is repeatable.
Right.
Okay. Well, if your test doesn't repeat, maybe there's a question you need to ask, such as why? Because maybe you're not controlling your initial conditions. Maybe there's some other things going on.
Yeah.
But you need to ask that question.
And this is way more popular now that people are doing like sort of repeated continuous trending. And it's like a requirement that every time we run this test, we're going to run it on every build, run it all the time. So just because you sort of blindly repeat something in Jenkins or in continuous development, it still doesn't mean you've controlled for the experiment.
Correct. And you might be running it 1, 2, 3, or 4 times, but it might not even be repeatable within the same build. If you never ask that question, can the test repeat? You could be in for a big surprise.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that you would look for that people don't often do?
So I look for a substantial similarity in response time, plus or minus 10%. I look for substantial similarity in volume, plus or minus 10%.
Like throughput.
Yeah, throughput. And then for the population standard deviation, I like that to be within like 5%. It's got to be a little wider if you're on a virtual machine because, some variability in the clocks. But in general, I want a nice 10% substantial similarity all the way around. And if I'm not within that 10% envelope, I don't feel that I have a repeatable test.
Exactly. And standard deviation, a bunch of those questions came up recently in interviews with me. And people didn't really understand how to visualize that bell curve and the size of the curve. Is it a big mountain or is it a pointy little itty bitty stick mountain?
I like a really tall, skinny mountain.
Tall, skinny, pointy spike.
Yeah.
Which means it's a very consistent measurement with a very narrow standard deviation. That one's
right. And if I've got little peaks and valleys that go out a little further out to the right, that means I have opportunities for improving efficiency.
Sure.
That's what that tells me.
Now, the other one that we have here is not checking for expected results. And this would be different than a functional test. So in performance testing, what you might not be checking for is, I expect that we'll have an SLA. That could be one. The expected result is the response time will be plus or minus 10%, maybe 250 millisecond web service call or a 3-second page.
I'm going to go even further than that. Most people assume a 200 comes back, an HTTP 200 in case of a web page. But if you're not checking for content, let's say I sign in and I have a page that comes back that says, "Hello, James, welcome to the site." If I'm not checking for "Hello, James," and I'm getting an HTTP 200 back, which might just as easily say, "I have no idea what you've just done. Your password is bad, but it's a valid HTTP page."
Yep.
I'm just going to continue to go on.
Yeah, so I would say maybe app level or context specific checking for the expected result on a transaction when you script it. Checking the payload. Did like you say, HTTP or the protocol may give you a positive result in a return code, but the app is failing. And that's a very good one as well. That's the basics. If you don't see that in the scripts, you're probably a bad performance tester. The other thing here is randomizing data. That's a particular challenge for new performance testers. Maybe they don't even have access to the database, or they're just kind of stuck on the client side because no one will talk to them, no one will let them get to the system, and that's just a recipe for disaster. And sometimes you even see no parameterization to the data at all. It's just whatever they recorded it as. Yeah, because they have only one set of data. Yeah, I just don't. I feel bad about people who are led to thinking that's to me a really meaningful test. It does tell you something, but wow, it's so much easy. It's so easy to do such a better job of saying, could you give me 100,000 test accounts, in order to run the load against that stuff. I think there's also limitations. Obviously, a whole special set of practices that we learned way back from the SOSTA guys. Now everyone sort of does this. But remember Dan Bartow's testing and production, like top 10 tips. Some of the first stuff that those guys got into doing were like, how do you parameterize test accounts so that these are unique and you can run them? I mean, it gets really advanced and elaborate, but some people don't even know that they should do the basics.
True.
Very true.
Yes.
You want to do the next one?
So the next one is something that people don't often think about, but it's part of the scientific method, which is no control elements. And the control elements can be any number of items. It could be known bad data.
Okay.
So you have some control data that's inserted that you know is going to fail. It could be a separate app, which is included in your performance test design, which you're only going to run one user against it the entire time. So if that one user begins to degrade, you happen to know that, well, that's probably a load generator issue. It has nothing to do with the app.
Right.
Or it could be a separate control generator where you have one user of each type. So if it doesn't degrade and the rest of your users do, you've got an overload load generator as well.
Yeah. Canary. Some people called it like a canary script.
Yeah. So the idea is you want to understand the quality of your test while your test is running. And that way, when you go to a developer and you say, hey, your child is ugly, your code is bad, and they attack you because they will.
Yep.
That's the natural inclination of people to attack you when you say their child is ugly.
That's right.
You're able to say, well, actually, here's what we did. We held up a picture of a pretty child next to your ugly child, and then I put on glasses, and then I calibrated against the pretty child picture with your ugly child, and your child is definitely ugly.
Yes, but you need to prove it's ugly and make sure that they don't just point the finger at you. So these are really some of the basics of people who set out to do performance testing, and they're probably absolutely just doing a bad job of it. But that's just the basics of what you will find.
There is one more, Mark, which is a big one.
What do you want to throw in there?
No monitoring.
Yes, no monitoring. That's that. And again, some of the, just like the data stuff, I can't imagine like you hire an external contract firm and then you say, I have to give you, the tools require you to have access to turn the monitoring on, but they won't give you the results to monitor. All the test tools, Load Runner, oh yeah, you can monitor with it. JMeter, you can monitor with it. SOSTA, you can monitor. All Neotis, you can monitor with it. But they'll like, oh, you're just the load tester from the client side. You don't need to monitor. Let's leave that to the experts on the back end. Well, we'll figure out what's going wrong.
Well, you know what, Mark? We'll get to that when we talk about patterns. That whole issue of someone who doesn't understand what you're doing directing your efforts.
Oh, yeah. So if you're not monitoring, and believe me, every single tool on the planet, even in the tool or outside the tool, you can monitor the CPU distribution, everything we talk about. If you're not monitoring, that is a surefire walk in the door, big red flag, bad performance test. Not even worth. You're just wasting time at that point. James, we should take a little break here and maybe have an ad from one of our sponsors.
Lightsquare.com is proud to be a sponsor of PerfBytes. Lightsquare.com is a unique offering for performance tuning as a service for web architectures. Lightsquare delivers tuning recommendations in under 72 hours without the typical investment in tools, license fees, or consultants where we do the work up front. With Lightsquare, you only pay based on the level of improvement. Find out more about Lightsquare's unique pricing model at www.litesquare.com/pricing.
Now, so those are kind of the basics. No parameterization, not repeatable, no control elements, no checking for expected results, which is good automation practice anyway. And no monitoring. Those are like no-brainer. You can tell within about 15 minutes whether things are good or bad.
This is Perf Design 101.
Yeah, totally. Now, in the second year of your performance testing world, you're going to commit some of these intermediate fouls, which are take a little more. You've got the basics done, but you're still not quite getting. This is like still junior performance tester stuff. And the one I just picked up from the previous thing we talked about, James, is that basic statistics. Like you don't understand what a frequency distribution or a histogram is. You don't understand standard deviation, and you don't understand percentile. And what all those things mean in terms of the accuracy of your test and whether it truly passes or truly fails, right?
I want to recommend a book.
Sure.
I own this book. It's one of those friendly yellow books.
Oh.
It's Statistics for Dummies. It's the perfect book for me. It really is. It's a good brush up.
We by the way, we don't get any royalties whatsoever.
No, we don't. But I own this book. It's on my Kindle because sometimes I need a layman's description of some of the statistical information that I'm working with, and it's great. I can pull it out. I can share it with people. It becomes a very disarming conversation because I can pull up Statistics for Dummies on my Kindle and I can say, look, I own this book. It's a great book. And I can flip right to the section on standard deviation and we can go over it together. So, it works really well.
Yeah. It's also something I see and I use now in almost every interview for a performance test or performance engineer. They have to understand the core elements of statistics. And that includes a percentile, because people may understand we go by the 90th percentile, but you have to understand why these statistics are there and explain what it means with regards to your test. I think if you're going to be an intermediate level performance tester and you don't understand the basic statistics and why and what they mean, that's a foul for sure.
Yep.
Sure. Now, the next one you have here, James, is talking about caching in the test design, which gets back to parameterization a little bit, but what else do you mean on the server side here?
So caching is kind of a multi-layered creature in this case. So if I don't parameterize my data, then I'm going to get that one piece of data that's sitting in RAM as most previously requested, and it's going to be really fast to serve. So I'm going to get an abnormally fast response time compared with what is actually happening in production. And it could be that a huge table scan was taken to initially seed that value into RAM. But once it's in RAM, it's really fast now. And if there's a broken index, you won't catch that as an example. There's also caching at the web tier that if you're not parameterizing data, you're going to get the same stuff that's cached inside of the web server for service.
Yep.
Same pages, so it's going to be really fast there, especially if you have anything that's built dynamically. And on the client itself, this is a little bit different type of cache management, but if you're not appropriately managing the cache for what should and should not be re-requested, in sense that, let's say I have a font that's on every page, if I'm requesting the font on every page, but it actually has a cache age associated with it where it shouldn't be requested on every page.
A lot of the tools now, almost everyone has the ability to manage how the virtual user or the thread responds in the sampler to what is cached and what is not.
Yeah.
Like there's a cache element, or the load runner, there's the clearing cache on every iteration, and things like these different settings. You really have to understand, like, especially if you're testing in the lab and in the real world you have a CDN, you got to be really careful about how you're simulating what is really like caching static images or not, and that kind of stuff.
So here is the big one with regards to cache, is I see a lot of people testing and said, oh, well, we're just going to turn off static elements. That is, we're going to turn off the request for fonts and cache and JavaScript and style sheets and all of these things. It just tests the dynamic components because, all that should be handled by the CDN.
Right.
You will never know if the CDN is misconfigured unless you're testing with some of those components. And I have never been to a client, never in 20 years, where the CDN has been configured optimally.
It's second to the load balancer because the load balancer is never configured properly.
Yeah. So if you want to immediately introduce value, bring some of those static components down and test the CDN, because odds are you will find that some things are escaping the CDN, which should be cached.
Yeah. And so when you say caching is not accounted for, meaning for an intermediate load test or a load tester engineer, they need to be able to say, here are the elements, how they will be cached, and here's how our test it accounts for that, or actually includes that proper understanding of the real world versus the lab.
Correct. And you ought to be able to look at the server logs and things of that nature, or the CDN cache profile, and see if they're actually being handled appropriately there as well.
Yeah. Now, James, the next one I think is a nitpick for me, because I think there's a lot of people that think really the hardest part of doing load testing is getting scripts to work properly. That can be one of the most difficult challenges for newcomers. And they may be seen after several years as they're a really good load tester because they're really awesome at scripting. But when it comes to conducting a load test and then doing analysis and reporting, another sign of an intermediate foul as a bad performance test in my book, and you had written it down here too, just pushing the button and blindly handing over a report. Here's your results. Bye-bye.
I speak with customers all the time about value, and they speak to me about, well, I get this paper at the end of the test, and I have no idea what it means.
Isn't that somewhat of it's a hangover from like really junior contractors who are like, that's my deliverable, and we're on the hook for deliverable, just deliver something and then we're out of here. I think that's bad business, but it's still really bad performance testing practice.
Yeah, because there's no measurement of risk that's been assessed.
Right. And if you've ever been in a contracting consulting position, the wording can come back to you where you provided a report, but then they start poking holes in your test, and you're going to eat those hours. You have to go back and repeat the test, and it may be on your expense and your dime, and other contracts have to wait. It can get really nasty.
Which is why you need those check-in for expected results, control elements. Make sure they're repeatable. Good, solid tests right up front.
Yeah. Do it right on the way in, and everything will come out of that result in the end. The report will just be like, we've already analyzed this. Here's just some data to show what we've already learned, and that's the way it should be. Another intermediate foul, James, is screwed up load generators. It goes all the way back to almost the first PerfBytes episode we ever did.
And our fight over virtualized load generators or not. Exactly.
Screwed up load generators. If you just know the controller or the VUGen in the load runner world, if you know how to use in SOSTA everything runs, but you really don't understand with Neotis, you understand sort of the controller element, but you don't really understand how the health of your load generator can impact your results. James, you already mentioned sort of control elements like a canary script or an isolated load generator with one script type or virtual user on it. Limited load generation skewing the results where, oh my gosh, the response time is really slow. But if you open a browser even manually or hit the web service manually with a curl command, boom.
I've got these 5,000 virtual users on one box. I don't understand.
Yeah, and you see it a lot now with the fatter virtual users, those threads, right? So you got the true client, which is quite thick. In the old school, it was always had the ICA, the Citrix, or the VDI kind of virtual user.
The GUI.
Yeah, the GUI type virtual user was just hefty. These are massive tools just to push an API. And a lot of times I would abandon those fat virtual users and move to like a straight ODBC type virtual user with an approach. So if you don't understand, if you're not monitoring your load generators during your load test, which is sort of a intermediate capability, you're probably conducting bad performance testing. You're probably overloading those load generators. And that's pretty
There's
bad.
a good rule of thumb. If you don't have at least 3 load generators, 2 for primary and 1 for control, then you have too few load generators. Now, you might need 100 for primary and 1 for control, but if you don't have at least 3, something is askew.
Might be goofy. Yeah, throw a flag. I would also say, James, don't just get 3 VMs on the same physical machine.
Correct.
We'll get to that next. That'll be good. The other big thing, James, here is we throw around the terms false positives and false negatives, which are really common in performance testing generally. And it's one of the things I look for on somebody that's just doing bad testing. Maybe we just do a little primer on what's a false positive, what's a false negative.
So a false negative, I have a different term for this. I call it an engineering ghost. So these are things that would occur in tests but don't occur in production. No think time, no iteration pacing, kind of a collapse of the client-server model. It creates a problem that would never occur in a natural population. So you spend a lot of engineering resources chasing it and fixing it, and then it still occurs, and basically you're diminishing your goodwill with development and project management and everything else. So we get a false negative, or we get a false positive where things have been deliberately excluded because, that's too difficult to test, or it's not ready yet, or we don't think that that's going to be a problem. So, just put a big red X on it. But either way, we either get a glowingly positive or a catastrophically negative result, both of which are not indicative of production. Is that a better way to put it, Mark?
It's a better way to put it, but if the actual dictionary definition of false positive would be a test result which incorrectly indicates that a particular condition or attribute is present. It's incorrectly showing. So your engineering ghost is actually a false positive, meaning, hey, we found a problem. We positively identified a problem, but in reality, that would never happen in production. And the inverse, a false negative, would be, nope, negative. We didn't find anything wrong. And then you go to production and you can't scale. So I think we're actually reversing it there.
Okay, I'll buy that.
When in doubt, just go to the Wikipedia dictionary. But but this is why it's confusing to people, because they're like, so you can just avoid positive or negative and call it an engineering ghost. Call it just, we have a false result. The false result means there are things that are wrong, but we didn't find them. Or we found some things, but they're not really problems that would happen in production. And so you can just call it a false result. And in bad performance testing, generally, one of the biggest false negatives that I find out here is people that claim, and I guess in a way it's a false negative because they have a limited simulation scope, meaning a lot of times we're only testing the few highest trends, only the login, browse, shop, whatever, the very limited scope of transactions that constitute 90% of the traffic. And when that estimation is off, where somebody said, well, we only run 3 scripts in the load test, and you talk to the functional automation guys, we have hundreds of scripts with hundreds of transactions with a huge scope of automation. Well, that's normal, but if it's way off, meaning we just ran 3 scripts in the load test, and really we probably should have a coverage of the top 10 or maybe top 20 transactions or pages, that limited scope, I think, leads you to a false negative, because you're not going to find anything wrong, with that little scope when there's all sorts of
my median over the last 20 years, I think, is somewhere around 10.
Yeah, you could say the top 10 transactions. It's probably gives some credibility to business people, or like, yeah, those are the top 10 transactions. Top 20, if you've got time, maybe do more, but that's business value kind of drop off. Sometimes I'll say, give me the top 20 transactions from Splunk or Dynatrace from production from the logs. Show me what those pages are and what the hits are coming through. But that's one example of a false negative where everything looks great on those 3 scripts, but in production, there's a heck of a lot more traffic that's going to be happening. What's another one, James?
Oh, gosh. Here's my pet peeve. The workload is out of scale or not scaled to the test environment. So my test environment is 1/5 the scale of production, but I'm running the full production load against my test environment.
And then you report to management, everything is great.
Or more likely, I report to management, oh my God, there's no way.
Oh, we're never going to be able to hit 200 transactions per second. We can only run like 12.
Exactly. And actually, as we get more and more, we might be bottlenecking down to like 6 or 5.
Yep.
So the scale of the transactions doesn't even match because you're locking on resources that you can't even hit a true 1/5 number at that point.
That's a bad test design generally, because the physical environment configuration is a big part of performance test planning. Figuring out what resources and at what scale. Like you say, if it's 1/5 of production, it should handle, let's take a swag, about 1/5 of the throughput of production.
Yeah.
And so just do very simple math. Just divide by 5, and that'll be your objective or your target for throughput, or supporting a number of users at whatever the usage model would be. But yeah, and if you're testing out of scale, and a lot of times we have to do this, just make sure that you're including some disclosure in the results. This test was conducted on a 1/5 scale environment. Here are the known limitations, blah, 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 of the test. I always like to have that disclosure.
Yeah, and that speaks to repeatability, because if someone else were to take your test and take it to another environment and run it, you want them to understand what your scale was versus the scale they're testing at.
Yeah. So you end up with, in some respects, false positives, false negatives. A false result will happen if you try to repeat a test, but you didn't document all of the moving parts in the configuration between production or the test environment. Somebody goes to repeat the test. They're on a totally different class hardware. They've got twice the data in the database that you had, and the results are skewed or not apples to dump trucks, right? They can't compare them.
Yep.
And those are pretty. Now, what's interesting here, James, we organize these things in sort of the basics, the intermediate, and advanced. Some of these intermediate bad performance things actually sound pretty egregious. They're pretty serious stuff here. What on earth are we going to cover in the advanced?
Oh, well, I got to tell you.
I think these are stupid tester tricks.
Let's get to the advanced, and I think you'll be surprised.
Advanced performance incompetency.
Advanced. So if you walk in and you see some of these items occurring, it is best to go to a long lunch where you buy the alcohol for the manager.
For the manager, just sit them down and just say, yes, we really need to talk.
We have an issue, and these bad habits are so egregious, you have to make a decision at this point. And I'm going to start it off by saying we're going to generate load from the same system that we're testing.
So you've got the load runner.
So I've got my virtual users from whatever tool on the same box that also houses the application we're testing.
So
so essentially network goes to 0 in this case.
And the more you have bad code in your virtual user thread script, then it's going to chew up cycles and take it away from the system under test. And this is even some of the most advanced people that know how to script really well. They've designed a good test, all this stuff, and sometimes they weren't responsible for installing the load generator tool, right? Yep. They're like maybe they're working as a consultant, and then their customer, the IT staff, well, where do you want me to install this load generator? Well, it needs to go in the lab, and they install it on the web server. So you might be trusting the admins to do this, and they just have no clue. So that's really, really bad. I also see this, James, the same thing, not just with load generators. I see it with simulators. So people that are having a simulator, like a service virtualization, behind the test, right? Behind the
and that is really a type of virtual user.
It is. It's sort of a reverse inverted virtual user. But in some cases, the simulator, the back-end data source of the simulator is making calls back into the database. Oh. While you're you put load on the app calls the simulator calls back to the same database that you're testing, and usually those queries are just crappy. They're not optimized. They're not expected.
Oh yeah, and it's slow. It adds extra threads that are not there in production.
Why is the database at 100% CPU? Did you install something? Why is this coming from Sim01 something? Oh my God, that's a bad. So if you really don't understand that you're generating load on the system under test from the system under test, that's bad, really bad, really bad. That's a sign you should just let some people go, and maybe time for some training, serious training. Yeah. Now, the other one here, for me, all bad things in business get back to cheating, lying, and stealing. We have seen people who were thrust into doing scripting or keeping a scenario going from somebody else, like you or myself, or some really smart people came along and gave them a JMeter script or a load runner script or something, and parts of the script failed. And they just start commenting out parts of the script that failed, and they hit the run button, and at least the errors are gone.
So Mark,
that's cheating.
I've received scripts for review anonymously.
Yeah,
that essentially comment out all activity, which would go to the server,
posts,
and left in think time. So you would actually have some time that shows up inside of
a transaction
of a transaction, and in some cases they replace think time with sleep, so it would actually show up even if they remove think time in the end.
Yeah, because at least in some tools, the think time is coded. You can include or exclude in the analysis. So they'll put an actual thread sleep in there.
Yep.
That's just cheating, straight up cheating. Now, if you were a manager and you were like, "Are we doing good performance testing?" This one also goes right to the top. Sit down. I mean, we've looked at it in the face of a test manager or a new performance test manager, and you have to break the news to them that it's like, well.
Now, having said that,
bad.
I will tell you, I've been told flat out by a company they can't fire them because it's more expensive to fire them than it is to ride out to the end of the contract.
And then it's a training exercise. It's also a new policy, maybe some oversight of the scripting, but mostly for people they're just underqualified, and maybe they're functional testers that got thrown into doing this. And there's also weird communication, like a developer will say, "Well, that call's not valid anymore. We don't even do that call. So why is that in your scenario?" And so they comment it out.
Mark, I knew a business availability center load runner VU-Gen style script that ran 6 months in production and produced positive results after the application was turned off.
The application had been gone.
And the management at that company was still like, "Oh, no, we can't get rid of these people. They do such a great job."
So this is cheating, and cheating is bad. So that's good. The other thing that's bad, lying, James.
Yes.
Lying is bad. And I've done a couple of audits of LoadRunner, JMeter. I don't think I did Silk Performer. And the new tools, I haven't been really doing audit stuff. It's just not as popular. But and a lot of the enterprise LoadRunner gigs, I did some LoadRunner auditing of the results, and I asked, get the raw logs, get the raw run from the user output and stuff. And I can't figure out how and finding evidence that they actually remove transactions out of the raw results database.
They
like
filtered them out.
File.
Yeah,
they filter out failures, exceptions. They change response codes. There are people that will just straight up lie because, there's a lot of pressure, James. We want to be the savior in the performance world and show that this was all this great work we did in the application. There's a lot of pressure to do that.
And I will say there are some PMs out there who will shoot the messenger.
Yeah. People who are doing a good job and actually trying to raise awareness and concerns of a defect. But there's people who will just lie on and it's so bad because the domino effect on business decisions and deployment decisions and IT tech decisions, especially with capacity planning, you could fire up a couple $1 million budget just down the drain on a bad performance test result or a bad capacity analysis. That's a lot of responsibility. And
yeah, you're killing the value of your test. And quite frankly, things of this nature are why we have the situation in the performance testing industry today where demand is exceptionally high, but rates are not going up. And the reason for that is that the actual value of what's being delivered is so low that it's completely offsetting the natural tendency of rates to rise.
Right. And that's an entire other episode.
Yeah, but that's why we do PerfBytes, actually, to help raise that value.
Yes. To avoid cheating, lying, and then stealing, which gets back to, pirating commercial tool licenses, which we don't like either. That's bad. James, what's the next one here in the advanced incompetency category?
Blame the tool.
Blame the tool, blame the tool.
Blame the tool.
Blame the tool. It's very musical of you. We did an entire episode called Blame the Tool for PerfBytes. I don't know if you know that. Yeah. You can go back and listen to it. It's all of the nuanced, psychotic insanity where people end up blaming the tool. And so if you, especially, if you're the tester who brought in the tool and then you didn't do a good performance testing job and you're like, well, these are some limitations of the tool. Yeah, it's usually a limitation of the person using the tool, because you got the power. Take LoadRunner, way old. It's got ANSI C. It's got Java Virtual User. It's got a .NET Virtual User. It supports all these different languages. Supports browsers.
You've got hooks into the operating system C compiler for Linux and Unix boxes. Yeah. You've got hooks into Visual Studio. So if you can't reproduce it by recording, you can use the source code. It's got Java interface. It's got a Visual Basic interface. It's got JavaScript interface.
Yeah. So if you're and all the tools, like we say, almost everyone that we've used now has some form of monitoring capability, and a lot of these are commercial or free. However, plugging stuff in together and all this, extending the tools. If you're blaming the tool for your bad performance testing, that is advanced incompetency, and in its best form. Because if you're good, not just at being a load tester, but being more of an engineer and really learning how to code, because to use any of these perf tools, you pretty much need to learn how to code stuff. So you get, there's nothing, most of the tools, that you can do just about anything. You can work around just about anything. Don't blame the tool. The last one, James, you threw in here was no think time. I might put that in the basics, though.
We did not mention in basics, so it should come in here someplace. But there's a really good reason why think time has to be there.
Yeah. If I walk in and I see a script and it has no think time or pacing, I'm throwing a flag. That's a basic newbie thing.
But no think time. Essentially, what you're doing is you're collapsing the client server model. The client server model is predicated upon a delay between the requests from any individual client and being satisfied by the server. So it's during this time of delay where the client is processing or thinking that other requests are addressed from other clients. So if you have no think time, essentially you are removing that delay that's built into the model where other clients are being addressed. And that then results in a non-predictive load model, essentially.
Listen up, PerfByters. Master Sergeant Performance here. Just in case you forgot, we're on the front lines of the battle for better performance. And I want you to pick up your feet and get marching on, soldiers. I'm tired of hearing that you're tired of never having enough time to test. And I'm tired of hearing that you're fed up with always being on the tail end of the SDLC. What's the problem? Did a jackalope just take a giant dump on your performance test plan? Tough luck, Bunky. No more wah. No more, we don't have time for this, or I don't have time for that. Stop being a mamby-pamby. Time to suck it up and become a real live performance engineer. You are the commander of your testing destiny, so take charge and start leading. Ever hear of CIU Softy? That's right, Bunky. C frickin' I, continuous integration. Take the lead. Work with your development partners. Spend some time on writing a real SOA suite. Kick it off from Jenkins and attack your code at the services level. And another thing, get to work with your partners in Dev Company on some real code review tools that will actually find issues before you test. In the Performance Army, we call that static analysis. Know it, live it, make it your new best friend. Show them you're just not another old run-of-the-mill performance tester. Show them you can add value way upstream in the SDLC. Heck, maybe you'll even get invited to some of those awesome parties you always get excluded from. You know, the officers make a mean cocktail at all of those requirements review meetings. So if you expect to storm the beaches and release land and kick some bottleneck butt with your new buddies in Dev Company, then get cracking on the basic trainings from the PerfBytes crew. And they might be able to help you get your caissons a-marching along. And remember, we at PerfBytes don't want to see you wind up in the stockade. You're all worthless and weak. Now drop and give me 20. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, so James, what I want to do in the second part of the show here is just kind of, you and I talk about our experience of being consultants, advisors, strategic advice for people. We see a lot of these bad practices, these bad performance testing issues and anti-patterns. And so we know kind of these red flags. So I think what we'll do is just take the last section. You put some great ideas out here. And we have sort of signs at the project level, red flags that you should look for. And maybe we'll dive in both at the project level, which is about people, organization, and stuff like that. Then there's also some technical signs that kind of take the next steps. If someone were to listen to this podcast and turn around and say, I'm going to go look for signs that we're doing bad performance testing. So in the project level, kick us off with the first project red flag that you
So the biggest sign is a lack of checks and balances. That is, you report to project management, who's responsible for the date of delivery, and there's no check against their behavior for quality.
And you mean you've got a PM who just says 2 weeks at the end of the project?
So your PM gets a bonus on August 1st delivery, and it doesn't matter what the quality is.
So you could have crap on August 1st.
And they still get their bonus.
Still get bonus. Or 2 weeks after it gets delivered, they get their bonus, and then it fails in production miserably.
As long as they are in charge of everything leading up to that point, and there's no checking and balance against that behavior, there's likely to be an issue. Especially if you find an issue, it's likely to go to production.
Yep. Another sign you can look for is that you have nobody as a official performance tester or somebody with experience doing performance testing in charge of the technical efforts to conduct the test and design it. So you have a functional tester or a junior dev or even a senior developer or an admin, system admin that just kind of shows up and says, this is how you're going to do this test. You shall do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, but I shouldn't. All these bad practices that James and Mark just told me about, I can't. You're telling me to do all the wrong thing. Somebody's in charge of telling you must do it this way. You're going to run this load this way.
That is really bad.
That's bad.
And right along with that is the next one, which is you have no agreed upon performance requirements. Yet test construction has begun. So you have a designated performance test team. We're going to do a performance test. And you see all this activity going on, but what are they designing?
What are they measuring?
And if you look at your requirements document, there are no performance requirements, but they're doing something.
Yeah.
What is it?
We mentioned a little bit here about the PM. You had already talked sort of about, budget versus quality. So it could be, I don't have money for that, so just give me some kind of a test that tells me what I want to hear. And we sort of covered that in the beginning. If your PM is saying, I'm going to get bonused on a given date versus quality, could also be budget spend versus quality. In some cases, doing bad load testing is worse than doing no load testing.
I would agree, because it gives you a false sense of security when you go to production. And in some cases, you're dealing with politics where what they really want is a check mark. But, we did performance tests. Check.
Yeah.
They really don't care what the quality of the test is. They want it to be as cheap as possible. But for political reasons, they cannot say that. They say, we want a high quality test. We want to find issues. But realistically, what they want is a checkbox. And if people would just be more honest, if they say all we want is a check, Well, quite frankly, taking a performance engineering route and going back and looking in dev and functional testing and stuff and finding issues there would actually be more effective than just a checkbox test.
Yeah. And just basically escalating the message that, hey, we all agreed that we don't do performance testing, and that made it all the way up the ladder. For someone to have lied about, well, we did performance testing, checkbox, sends the wrong message. Because if you got all the way up the ladder and someone said, wait a minute, this is the largest campaign in the history of the company. What do you mean you didn't do any load testing? Well, we didn't do load testing. Why? Well, because you put me in an impossible situation with no budget and no time. And so we just skipped that. And they'll go back to the drawing board. All right, we'll give you 2 more weeks. All right, we'll give you more resources. So somebody has to twist their arm in order to do it right. And there's a lot of stupid people in the world, James. You just got to help them not be stupid about performance. The other thing is, if you have executives that do, like it mentioned, controlling the purse strings, the budget, and the resources you need, if you constantly say, gosh, we really need an isolated environment for load testing, or we really need the proper tooling to measure and monitor, and they just, nope, no budget, nope, no budget, nope, no budget, that's a good sign. That's a red flag that somebody doesn't. I would be nice to have at least 2 people on the load testing team, because if one of you gets sick, there's it's work stoppage, and that's at least 2 people, if not more, to scale. That would be really good. What else you got here, James? Red flags.
If you go into project meetings and you start hearing term warranty period, with the idea that we have to get beyond the warranty period.
Yeah.
Because then performance is somebody else's problem. It's operations or it's the business or whatever. That's generally a red flag if you're more concerned in your project meetings about warranty period than you are about quality.
And that can happen with certain products. Like you have a deliverable shrink wrap type product. But even in all of those business situations, when you finally talk to a business owner, you're in DevOps, and the speed with which we put stuff out, you're only passing the buck to yourself 2 sprints from now. If you skip and, well, it's past the warranty period, sure enough, unless you're quitting and leaving the business, it's going to come back around to you soon enough, sooner than it ever did before, I think. One of the other red flags that I find if I first ask a team, and this is at the practitioner level, is if people have limited access to developers or architects or the people or stakeholders who can answer their questions or help them. Now, that can either be that they don't have access at all, meaning they're not even allowed to pick up the phone, or if there's an antagonistic relationship between these people. If the test team can't get answers.
So Mark, I was once told by a PM, do not contact that person. They are doing real work.
Yeah, that's just mean.
Yeah, at that point, I should have walked off the engagement and just said we're not going to continue.
Yeah.
But I was dumb and I stayed.
We like to help, and when people are in their worst dysfunctions, we end up being the people to help them. The last one you have, James, which is just well known through all of our years of podcasting on the subject, it's that performance testing project, 2 weeks, hard-coded at the end of the project plan, immovable, immutable, and there's no compromise made in order to keep the schedule. They'll just plow right over you when they're late on their date.
Yep. And in this case, you're going to have to make compromises. It's just a question of where, when, how large, but you should document every single one of them, get sign off on them in email from someone else, but you need to inform project management, business management, some other management that this compromise has to be made in order to hit the schedule, and it will have a particular effect on test quality. And this is really, it's your get out of jail card.
Sure. I think I wanted to put something back on one you mentioned before about this. You said there's no agreed upon performance requirements, yet your test design and construction has begun. I forgot to mention our classic, you have no performance attributes or validation criteria on a user story.
Yes.
That's one of the first easy things you can look for a red flag. Hey, do you have performance on your user stories? Nope.
Or you go to 5 people associated with the project and ask them what performance means.
They get different answers or no
you get
answer.
5 different answers.
So these are kind of the people problems that we look for in red flags. There's also some technical signs in terms of red flags, which are like the anti-patterns and bad practices we talked about before. But there's a few things at sort of the meta level that I analyze or observe. And one of the technical things I see just in terms of the complexity or technicalities in scripting is if somebody estimates, that it takes a day to write a JMeter script or a test script of some sort. And what you start observing in the sprint is that the complexity takes 2 to 3 times longer for the same script. That's throwing a flag that either we don't have the right talent or we just have terrible estimation on the complexity of what it takes to get this scripting done. I think we're fairly optimistic people, but the truth is sometimes people think this just put it in your tool. It's easy. And then there's nothing easy about Load Runner. Oh
yeah, it's just record and replay. Just record and
that
replay.
Little that non-work. I'm doing real work over here. That's called development. But you do your little scripting thing. It's very condescending. But the truth is, if I showed some of the people some of the JMeter stuff that I've written recently, it's holy cow! I didn't even know you could do that with JMeter. I mean, I didn't even know, but it's pretty complex stuff. Not so much to a Java programmer, but it might be that you underestimate that. So I think script development taking a long time is a good sign. What else you got, Jay?
On these free tier commercial tools, I could run 2,000 users with a 50 user license.
10 users. I bet I could do it with 10 users.
Yeah.
Then you're supposed to say, I could do that.
I could do it with 5. I can name that song with 1 virtual user.
That actually happened in the real world. People would compete on their ability to run a load test with the least number of threads, which is because there's nothing worse than this. To me, that's a red flag that goes back to the CFO or the budget, but also, hey, I'm technical sign is why are you trying to do a concurrency factor or extrapolation from 10 TPS to 1,000 TPS?
If your risk in production is $10 million and you're arguing over a $50,000 license, rental for a month, something is wrong with your risk management.
Yeah, exactly. That's somebody's bonus somewhere, somebody's margins. And are they more important than the customer, the mission, the stakeholder, the shareholder? I don't think so.
I have seen managers make personal decisions related to their bonus, which are in opposition to the long-term goals of the company, because the bonus goals are not aligned with the goals of the company.
There you go. That's a bad thing.
Baby did a bad thing. Baby did a bad thing.
Another thing I'll throw out there as a technical sign is if you, again, like we said, if somebody's just pushing the button without analyzing the results. They just, here's your report, enjoy your 200-page PDF. And thud power is what we used to call it back in the day. But
I recommend 20-pound paper for that. Yeah. It gives a nice hefty thud.
Hefty thud, very resonant. That's probably the most important thing. Yeah. What's the next one here, James?
Oh, your test environment is shared with all other testing efforts. So you've got UFT, functional, performance, all in one environment, and you have to bend to their efforts because they are more important because they answer the question of does it work for one? And will the customer accept it? And what if you have to reset your environment? So, exactly.
Source sharing too. So if somebody is doing a build on the same host that I'm running my VMs on in the middle of my load test, I'm out of CPU. That's a technical architecture issue in the environment, in the test environment, which is a major red flag. The other thing that's also interesting here, you mentioned, is just testing against a different interface than what actually would be used in production. And I think this happens sometimes when people say, oh, don't test the GUI. That's just a single user thing. Just go ahead and just test the API at the API level.
And it happens in the reverse as well, particularly when you look like these big CRM systems like, PeopleSoft, SAP, things of that nature, where they have both a manual interface to conduct a business process and they have a batch interface.
Oh, yeah.
And said, well, we're going to performance test against the manual interface, but we're going to use the batch interface in production. Well, you know what? They have different priorities.
Oh, sure.
To the system. And your response times are not going to be equivalent. Your resource utilization is not going to be equivalent. And you're not going to understand scale as well.
Now, not as a technical sign, this last one here, although it is sort of a technical sign, is if you go back to a developer with a defect and you say, I think this is the problem, and the developer says, well, it's not a problem.
Yeah, so this comes from Mr. Wilson.
And you just leave it, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of symptoms of an unhealthy organization here.
Yeah.
One is the developers being dismissive. And,
Sure.
and this can happen because in a lot of organizations, QA is a lesser field than development. People get promoted out of QA to be PM or developer, as an example.
Yeah.
And so you have these cultural biases of, well, I know more than you, I've done your job type of thing.
I think to his point as well is that it's probably technically bad because you've hit the technical limitation of the dev, and there's still more to be known technically there, meaning there's a gap in everyone's understanding of why something is.
Yes.
I think logging is a good example where usually devs are like, well, we have to log all of this. And then when you really dig into it,
we have to log. It's a question of how much we have to log.
And what level. But I mean, that's a good example where it's like, how come you guys are just blasting the logs with all this stuff? And then you really, we need those. And then you really go digging around to all the different people, ask another person, ask the admin, ask the monitoring. They're like, oh, we don't need those messages. Oh, those messages are already tracked somewhere else. We already have them in the data. I don't know why those guys log so much. So if you only ask one person and you just take their excuse or their answer and you don't ask any more questions, you don't probe and dig a little deeper, that's bad. Bad performance. Very bad. James, that's a lot of information.
Yes. That is. So we've gone through kind of the technical side of the house. We've gone through some anti-patterns to look for. And Mark, I'm kind of curious as to kind of your closing thoughts out.
Well, I think it's kind of fun just to take some of these things. Obviously, you and I, we repeat ourselves, and then after that, we redundantly repeat ourselves again after all these years. But it's kind of fun to do a whole show just focusing on bad practices, because it's sort of the antithesis of everything we talk about on the show, trying to help people. So it's kind of good to put it all together.
It makes you want to go out and do a project with all these patterns in it just to see if management is aware.
Well, it would be kind of fun to do. Maybe we should do this as a workshop, like a 4-hour in the life of a project, and all of these anti-patterns and problems present themselves in the scenario, in the game. Like maybe we need a performance testing game based on all of these anti-patterns, because you got people problems, technical problems.
And have a little cord like up on a train where people can pull the cord when they see an issue.
Would be good. But the main takeaway for me mostly is that everything we've talked about to some extent, even though they sound really horrible, and I'm sorry to use the word stupid, but these are even my own stupid human mistakes. I mean, I've made some of these mistakes in my career as I was learning. Everything that you do can be repaired, can be fixed or improved. And just keep in mind, you can always reach out to us for advice. Don't be afraid to ask people for guidance or help. And if you need us to talk to your teams or talk to your development teams or your management to just reinforce what you need, let us know, I think. What about you?
Well, Mark, we always seem to kind of repeat ourselves over time.
Did we already repeat ourselves? Did you just repeat what I repeated?
Did I do a Pete and repeat?
Pete and repeat. That's right.
Well, case in point.
What is that? Pete and repeat went down to the lake. Pete jumped in, and who was left?
I don't know that one.
Yeah, sorry.
For me, performance is all about patterns. It's patterns that I look for in analysis. It's patterns that I look for when I'm building out a test, script, and the patterns going back and forth. It's also patterns and practices for what's going on a project and what's going on with the technical capabilities. So you want to watch as a performance engineer for these patterns in process, good and bad. So watch for them in the project, watch for them in the application. And when you see a poor pattern, I mean, you can either go to the PM, you can go to the business, you can go to dev. But when you find it, pull the cord, ring the bell, jump up and down, have a pizza party, bring everyone in and say, hey, we got a bad pattern. Let's address it. But ultimately, you want full disclosure on all patterns that you identify, good and bad, because this keeps you valuable. Even if someone decides to ship a bad product, you do not want it as a reflection on your efforts.
Yeah. Yeah, of course you don't. And if you're in charge of a team and you're maybe new to performance testing as a lead, maybe these will help you figure out what's the first things to improve on, for sure.
Yes.
Well, heck, there goes another hour of your life that you will never get back right away. Unless, of course, you invent a form of time travel, in which case I would recommend that you go back and listen to either that episode on performance analysis with Prancercise or the one on bots, I think 62, with Howard doing the bots. That was absolutely hilarious. I thought that was kind of nice. And, of course, I'll just give my thank yous to the sexy Irish voice of PerfBytes, to our co-hosts who are getting themselves put together for these other shows we're launching this year.
Excellent.
I know.
Excellent. That's always a good sign.
Yeah.
So I'd like to give a shout out and a thank you to all of our loyal listeners. We are very appreciative of the feedback you provided us over the years. We look to provide additional value to you in the remainder of this year and in the years to come. If you have any ideas, thoughts, concerns, fears, uncertainties, doubts, or you just want to say hi, just send us a note at ask@perfbytes.com.
Yeah. Or, hey, how's it going at perfbytes.com.
Exactly. Or hey, bald guy. That would be me.
Yeah,
by the way.
yeah. That'll go right to James.
Yeah. At perfbytes.com. All of it just gets routed to us. So, just anything.
James, who's powering us today?
Mark, today's show is powered by quarks, specifically strange quarks, which are combined with other types of quarks into hadrons, which are finally rolled up into atoms. And when excited, these atoms form electricity used to power today's show. I think that's shocking.
Shocking. I'm electrified by all of the scientific knowledge. Of course, keep in mind that today's show, all the content and of this episode and any episode, is protected by the God particle.
Holy cow!
Yes, that's a capital G God particle, capital P particle, because it's really, really important to understand where everything in the universe came from. Of course, the God particle observes everything you are doing all the time, even when the little camera thing on your monitor is covered up, it can still see you because it's pretty cool. Even you, little Bailey. So don't steal any of the content of this show, or else you may have to visit the Large Hadron Collider for a discussion that will not go well. Atom smashing.
For more information about PerfBytes, please visit the show's website at www.perfbytes.com or follow us on the Twitter, the Tumblr, the Facebook. And of course, you can always subscribe and listen to the PerfBytes podcast on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, the new name for iTunes.
iTunes, yeah.
iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, Overcast, TestingPodcast.com. Just open up your favorite listening app, search for PerfBytes, and click the subscribe button.
Subscribe!
You can always send us an email with your questions or thoughts at ask@perfbytes.com. Brian Wilson will be very happy to receive your mail. Or leave us a voicemail at 77-LOAD-PERF. That's 775-623-7373.
Beautiful. Yeah, and keep in mind that PerfBytes show and staff are supporters of the Ministry of Testing and TestBash, the Computer Measurement Group, the Workshop on Performance and Reliability, your friendly neighborhood DevOps community, and of course, the Software Test Professionals community of software testers. We always hope you will visit us and come see us at the next STPCon conference, which will be outside of DC this coming September in 2017. Visit www.stpcon.com for more details. Join us for a live show, some political action, in downtown DC, and we can visit the museums. We may even have some single malt Scotch tasting, as usual.
We also support your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, so keep that in mind. Thank you for listening. Have a great day, and catch us on the next episode of PerfBytes.
See y'all
later.